We've decided to reorganize the client relations department, Ruth. Today will be your last day. The sentence hung in the sleek conference room like a draft no one wanted to acknowledge. I looked at Dominic Hayes, the new managing partner who had joined Franklin and Associates just 8 months ago. His face carried that carefully trained mix of polite regret and distant professionalism. After 25 years? I asked. My voice stayed firm, even though it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Business decisions aren't personal, he said, pushing a manila folder across the polished table. HR has put together a severance package, 2 months' salary, and continued benefits through the end of the quarter. Janice from HR sat beside him, offering a sympathetic nod while keeping her eyes on the table. The restructuring affects several departments, she added. This isn't a reflection of your performance. But wasn't it? At 58, I was the oldest person in client relations, and my salary matched my decades of experience. Experience that had helped grow Franklin and Associates from a small, ambitious legal consulting firm into a major industry name. Does Arthur know about this? I asked, thinking of Arthur Franklin, the founding partner who had hired me 25 years ago. Dominic's jaw tightened. All partners were consulted on the restructuring decisions. A clear non-answer. Arthur had been in London for the past 3 weeks, negotiating our expansion into the European market. Best of luck in your future endeavors, Dominic finished, smiling in that way people do when they want to seem sincere, but aren't. Security will escort you while you pack up your desk. Standard protocol. I almost laughed. I had helped write that standard protocol 12 years ago. My name is Ruth Pearson, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the Senior Director of Client Relations at Franklin and Associates, one of Boston's top legal consulting firms. I'd spent my career building strong relationships with our clients, learning their needs, anticipating their concerns, and making sure they knew they mattered far beyond the billable hours. In a field where firms often felt interchangeable, I made sure our clients saw us as irreplaceable. And now I was being dismissed like an old manual no one bothered to update, left with a manila folder and a handful of empty phrases in return for a quarter-century of loyalty. As the security guard stood nearby, unsure what to do with himself, I slowly packed my belongings. Photos from charity galas with clients, handwritten thank you notes from the Chambers family, after we guided them through a challenging corporate restructuring. The crystal paperweight Arthur had given me on my 20th work anniversary. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine Winters, CEO of Winters Healthcare, our largest client. Ruth, heard troubling rumors about changes at F&A. Our quarterly review is next week. Call me ASAP. I lifted my eyes and saw Dominic watching from his office, already on the phone, probably trying to control whatever fallout he feared might come next. But what he didn't realize, what none of them seemed to grasp, was that client relationships couldn't simply be reassigned or shuffled around in a system. They were built on trust, consistency, and real connection. And I had just been cut off from 25 years of those connections. I joined Franklin and Associates in 1998, back when we occupied only half a floor in a modest office building and had exactly 17 clients. Arthur Franklin was 42 at the time, full of drive, full of ideas, and determined to build a consulting firm that operated differently. He wanted a place where client satisfaction truly mattered more than billable hours. Numbers are the language of business, Ruth, he had told me during my interview, but relationships are its heart. Anyone can run calculations. Not everyone can build trust. I carried that philosophy with me from day one. While others pushed for promotions through high-visibility projects and office politics, I focused on becoming essential to our clients. I remembered their children's names and their college plans. I knew which clients wanted deep technical breakdowns and which preferred broad summaries. I tracked their company milestones, leadership changes, and strategic shifts so we could get ahead of their needs instead of simply reacting to them. You're the relationship architect, Arthur had said at my 20th anniversary celebration. You built the foundation that holds up everything we do. The firm kept growing steadily under Arthur's guidance, but things started to shift 2 years ago when we brought in outside investors to support our expansion. New partners joined the leadership team, people with Harvard MBAs and polished slideshows, who pushed strategies centered more on efficiency metrics and less on client experience. Dominic Hayes, with his glossy presentations and relentless focus on the bottom line, was the most forceful of those new additions. Since he arrived, employee turnover had jumped by 40%. The unofficial motto quietly changed from Arthur's clients first to Dominic's maximum value extraction. I raised concerns during executive meetings, highlighting how our client retention numbers were beginning to slip. We're risking long-term stability for short-term wins, I warned. The market is changing, Ruth, Dominic replied in that dismissive tone he'd perfected. We need to adapt or die. Some of our legacy processes are, frankly, outdated. Over the past 6 months, I noticed I was gradually being pushed to the edges. Meeting invites stopped coming. Email threads no longer included me. Younger team members were suddenly assigned as secondary contacts on key accounts, decisions made without my consultation. Still, I believed my decades of experience and the depth of my client relationships would shield me. After all, I handled relationships with clients who brought in more than 60% of our yearly revenue. Catherine Winters alone generated nearly $4 million annually, and in her most recent contract renewal, she clearly stated that she wanted me to remain her primary contact. But lately, I had sensed something troubling beneath the surface. Just last week, I overheard Dominic on the phone saying, "The restructuring gives us a chance to cut the legacy fat. Their retirement plans will cost us millions over time." I should have realized what was coming. But after 25 years, I made the mistake of believing loyalty still carried weight. The embarrassment of being escorted out of the building like some kind of security risk stayed with me. Even 3 days later, the memory felt raw. I sat in my apartment surrounded by job search websites and unanswered messages from colleagues. My LinkedIn profile had suddenly exploded with views. Nothing like being fired to make you briefly interesting. Then my landline rang, which almost never happens anymore. I nearly let it go to voicemail until I recognized the number. "Hello? Ruth, it's Arthur." His familiar British accent was tighter than usual. "I just landed from London and heard what happened. This wasn't approved by me." A rush of conflicting emotions hit me. Relief that he hadn't signed off on it, anger that it happened anyway, and a lingering sense of betrayal that he hadn't been able to protect me after everything we'd built together. "Well, it still happened," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Dominic told me all partners were consulted." "I was intentionally cut out," Arthur replied, frustration clear in his tone. "They waited until I was overseas dealing with the EU regulatory issues. The executive committee pushed it through as an emergency action, claiming it was necessary to improve quarterly projections before our investor meeting. 25 years, Arthur. I deserved more than a 10-minute meeting and a security escort." "You deserved far better," he said quietly. "I want to fix this. What if I bring you back? We can call it a misunderstanding, a communication mistake." "It's not that simple," I said. "Dominic made it very clear that I'm seen as expendable. Legacy fat, that's the phrase I heard him use." The silence that followed told me Arthur fully understood the weight of what I'd said. In the corporate world, once leadership undermines you, your effectiveness is destroyed. There's no real way to come back from that. "I'm truly sorry, Ruth," he said. "This company was built on the relationships you cultivated." "And how are those relationships being handled now that I'm gone?" I asked. There was another pause. "Dominic reassigned your accounts to the junior partners. Melissa Bennett is handling Winters' healthcare." I couldn't hold back a dry laugh. Catherine Winters had openly clashed with Melissa during a strategy meeting last year, calling her style too aggressive and too impersonal. Good luck with that, I muttered. After I ended the call, I stared at my phone as it began lighting up nonstop. Messages were pouring in, not just from Catherine, but from Douglas at Archer Pharmaceutical, Belinda at Summit Financial, and even the entire executive team at Westridge Manufacturing. Word about my departure was spreading fast. I hadn't contacted any of them. I would never badmouth my former employer, no matter how poorly I'd been treated. But clients talk. They serve on the same boards, attend the same conferences, join the same industry groups. They compare notes. My doorbell rang, and a courier handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal letter from Catherine Goldstein, the most sought-after headhunter in Boston's consulting world. Attached was a handwritten note. Heard what happened at F&A. Several firms would value your client portfolio. Dinner tomorrow? I set the letter aside, thinking about Dominic's smug expression during my termination. I had no intention of sabotaging Franklin and Associates. I didn't need to. They had already done the damage themselves. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:38 a.m. sharp. Catherine Winters never bothered with greetings. Tell me you're not actually gone, she demanded immediately. I'm afraid I am, I replied, pouring my coffee. Restructuring, apparently. Restructuring, Catherine repeated sharply. I've worked exclusively with you for 12 years. Melissa Bennett emailed me yesterday to introduce herself as my new relationship manager. That girl tried to explain my own business model to me last year. I chose my words carefully. Franklin and Associates is making strategic changes. I'm sure they believe they're acting in the best interest of their clients. Don't give me the corporate script, Ruth. We've known each other too long. She paused for a moment. Where are you going next? I haven't decided yet. Well, decide quickly. Our contract with F&A is up for renewal in 60 days. I'd prefer to follow you. And this should have been the moment for me to say something polite about Franklin and Associates, something about the firm's work remaining steady despite staffing changes. That's what professionalism typically required. Instead, I said, I appreciate your confidence, Catherine. Let me explore my options and get back to you. By noon, I'd received similar calls from 5 other major clients. By dinner, that number had grown to 11. I hadn't contacted a single one of them. I didn't have to. That evening, I met Catherine Goldstein at an upscale restaurant in Back Bay. She studied me over her reading glasses, her expression sharp and analytical. You're the talk of the industry right now, she said once we'd ordered. Dominic Hayes made a catastrophic mistake. Perhaps, I replied lightly, keeping my tone neutral. She laughed. Always diplomatic. That's part of what makes you so good at what you do. She pushed a folder toward me. 3 firms want to meet with you. 2 of them are creating a special role specifically to bring you and your client relationships on board. When I looked at the compensation figures, I almost choked on my water. They were offering nearly double what I'd been earning before. They're not just paying for your experience, Catherine said, clearly amused by my reaction. They're paying for your little black book. The irony hit me immediately. Franklin and Associates had tossed me aside for being too expensive, and now their competitors valued me at twice the price. I wondered whether Dominic had ever considered this outcome when he ran his cost-cutting numbers. The next morning, Arthur called again. I need to see you, he said, sounding more unsettled than I'd ever heard him. Can you come to the office? I don't think that's appropriate given the circumstances. Then lunch. The harvest. 1 p.m. Please, Ruth. Things are happening that you should know about. Curiosity finally won. At exactly 1 p.m., I walked into the harvest and found Arthur already seated. He looked exhausted. Thank you for coming, he said, clearly relieved. I've been trying to fix this, but Dominic is blocking me at every turn. He's convinced the board that your termination was necessary to modernize our approach. And the clients? I asked. How are they responding to this modernization? Arthur grimaced. Not well. Catherine Winters has demanded a meeting with the entire executive team. Douglas from Archer is reevaluating their contract, and 3 smaller clients have already given notice. I took a slow sip of water and waited. Here's what I'm proposing, Arthur continued, leaning forward. I'll create a new role, Chief Client Officer. You'd report directly to me, not Dominic. Better pay, more authority. It was everything I would have said yes to a week earlier. Too perfect. I studied Arthur closely. Beneath the concern, I saw something else. Fear. What aren't you telling me, Arthur? He hesitated before finally admitting. Dominic has been planning to push me into early retirement. He's been gathering support from the newer partners. If the client situation gets worse, he'll use it to force me out. And there it was. Arthur wasn't trying to rescue me. He was trying to rescue himself. I was simply the tool he needed. I'm sorry, Arthur, I said, but I already have meetings lined up with other firms. You understand, business decisions aren't personal. The look on his face as I repeated Dominic's words back to him was almost worth the entire ordeal. Almost. Over the next week, I met with all 3 firms Catherine had recommended. Each conversation followed the same script: glowing praise for my relationship management, careful probing about which clients might follow me, and steadily increasing compensation packages. I found myself drawn to Blackwell Consulting, a mid-sized firm whose values reminded me of the early days of Franklin and Associates. Their offer included an equity partnership, something F&A had never once offered me, despite everything I had contributed over 25 years. Meanwhile, Franklin and Associates was unraveling even faster than I expected. Industry blogs were buzzing about client dissatisfaction and leadership conflicts. My former assistant, Thomas, sent regular updates. Catherine Winters had met with the executive team and left visibly furious. Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals had canceled their quarterly review. Even Westridge Manufacturing, a client known for unwavering loyalty, was rumored to be requesting proposals from competitors. Then came the call that changed everything. Ruth Pearson, I answered while reviewing Blackwell's offer letter. Ms. Pearson, this is Jeffrey Hammond from the Boston Business Journal. I should have offered some reassuring words about Franklin and Associates. Maybe something about how their work would stay steady even with the staffing changes. That's what professionalism called for. Instead, I simply said, I appreciate your confidence, Catherine. Let me look at my options and I'll get back to you. By noon, I had received similar calls from 5 other major clients. By dinner time, that number had climbed to 11. I hadn't contacted a single one of them. I didn't need to. Catherine Goldstein met me at an upscale restaurant in Back Bay, her sharp gaze taking me in over her reading glasses. You're the talk of the industry right now, she said once we ordered. Dominic Hayes made a disastrous mistake. Perhaps, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She laughed. Always diplomatic. That's part of what makes you so effective. Then she slid a folder toward me. 3 firms want to meet with you. 2 of them are creating a new role specifically to bring you, and your client relationships, over to their teams. I skimmed the compensation numbers and almost choked on my water. They were offering nearly double my previous salary. They're not only paying for your expertise, Catherine said, catching my reaction. They're paying for your little black book. The irony wasn't lost on me. Franklin and Associates had thrown me out for being too expensive, yet now their competitors were valuing me at twice the amount. I wondered if Dominic had ever imagined this outcome when he made his cost-cutting decisions. The next morning, Arthur called again. I need to see you, he said, sounding more unsettled than I'd ever heard him. Can you come to the office? I don't think that's appropriate right now. Then lunch. The Harvest. 1 p.m. Please, Ruth. Things are happening that you should know about. Curiosity won. At exactly 1 p.m., I walked into the Harvest and found Arthur already there, looking worn out. Thank you for coming, he said, relief washing over his face. I've been trying to fix all of this, but Dominic is blocking me. He's convinced the board that letting you go was necessary for modernizing our approach. And the clients? I asked. How are they reacting to this modernization? Arthur grimaced. Not well. Catherine Winters demanded a meeting with the full executive team. Douglas from Archer is reevaluating their options. 3 smaller clients have already given notice. I took a sip of water and stayed quiet. Here's my proposal, Arthur said, leaning forward. I'll create a new position, Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to me, bypassing Dominic entirely. Better pay, more autonomy. It sounded perfect. Exactly the role I would have wanted a week ago. Almost too perfect. When I studied Arthur's expression, I saw something deeper than concern. I saw fear. What aren't you telling me, Arthur? He hesitated, then finally admitted. Dominic is trying to force me into early retirement. He's been consolidating power, building alliances with the newer partners. If client losses continue, he'll use it to push me out. So that was the truth. Arthur wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save himself. I was simply a tool in that mission. I'm sorry, Arthur, but I already have meetings scheduled with other firms. You understand? Business decisions aren't personal. The look on his face when I echoed Dominic's words almost made the entire ordeal feel worth it. Almost. Over the next week, I met with all 3 firms Catherine had recommended. Each meeting followed the same pattern: glowing remarks about my client relationship skills, subtle questions about which clients might follow me, and steadily increasing compensation offers. I found myself leaning toward Blackwell Consulting, a mid-sized firm whose values reminded me of what Franklin and Associates used to be. Their offer included an equity partnership, something Franklin and Associates never offered me, despite my decades of contributions. Meanwhile, the situation at Franklin and Associates was unraveling faster than I expected. Industry blogs were reporting client unrest and leadership conflicts. My former assistant, Thomas, kept me updated. Catherine Winters had stormed out of her executive meeting. Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals had canceled their quarterly review. Even Westridge Manufacturing, a client known for its long-term loyalty, was rumored to be exploring other options. Then came the call that changed everything. Ruth Pearson, I said, answering while reviewing Blackwell's offer letter. Ms. Pearson, this is Jeffrey Hammond from the Boston Business Journal. I sat up straight. The BBJ was practically scripture in Boston's corporate world. I'm working on a story about the leadership shakeup at Franklin and Associates and its impact on their client relationships. Your name has come up multiple times. Would you be willing to comment? This was dangerous territory. Anything I said could be interpreted as speaking against Franklin and Associates, which could violate the non-disparagement clause in my severance agreement. I'm not comfortable commenting on internal matters at Franklin and Associates, I replied carefully. Understandable, Hammond said. What about the fact that 7 major clients have already announced they're ending their partnerships with FNA? Many believe this exodus is connected to your departure. 7? I had only spoken with 15, and none had confirmed they were leaving. I can't speak on clients' business decisions, I said. There are many factors that go into choosing consulting partners. Of course, I heard him typing. One more question. Any comment on the letters signed by 26 of FNA's clients demanding that Arthur replace Dominic Hayes as managing partner? I almost dropped the phone. I have no knowledge of any such letter. After the call ended, I sat there stunned. 26 clients? A coordinated effort to remove Dominic? I hadn't orchestrated any of this. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Emergency all-hands meeting tomorrow morning. Partners flying in from everywhere. Dominic looks like he's about to have a stroke. An hour later, Arthur called. Did you organize this client revolt? He demanded, skipping any greeting. I've done nothing, Arthur. I haven't reached out to a single client. Then how do you explain this? His voice was frantic. 70% of our client base is threatening to leave. The board is in full panic. Investors want answers. I don't have any, I said. Maybe they value relationship continuity more than cost-cutting efficiency. This isn't funny, Ruth. 25 years of building this firm, and it could collapse in 25 days. There was a dark satisfaction hearing the fear in his voice. This was the same Arthur who had stood by while I was pushed out after 25 years of loyalty. What do you want from me, Arthur? Come back, he pleaded, not as chief client officer, as a full equity partner. Help me stabilize everything. Partner. The role I had deserved for at least a decade, the role I'd been denied repeatedly. And Dominic? I asked. The board is meeting tonight, Arthur said. His future will be decided before tomorrow's all-hands meeting. I thought about Blackwell's offer. The partnership, the stability, the clean break. But I had spent 25 years building those client relationships at Franklin and Associates. In many ways, they were my life's work. I need to think, I said. You'll have my answer in the morning. Sleep didn't come that night. I paced my apartment while the digital clock crept toward dawn. Going back to Franklin and Associates meant walking into the same office where my humiliating exit had been tolerated in silence. It meant navigating the political fallout of Dominic's downfall, something I hadn't caused but would inevitably be blamed for. And the culture at FNA had been deteriorating for years. One leadership change wouldn't solve that overnight. But Blackwell offered a fresh start. New people, new environment, new possibilities. And their compensation and partnership terms were more than generous. I could bring willing clients with me and build something vibrant from the ground up. By 6 a.m., I had made my decision. I called Catherine Goldstein, knowing she would be awake. I'm going with Blackwell, I told her. Smart choice, she replied. I'll let them know. They'll be thrilled. There's one more condition, I added, explaining my terms. Catherine laughed. Ruth, ruthless as ever. I love it. I'll present it to them this morning. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into Franklin and Associates for the first time since my termination. The receptionist's eyes widened. Miss Pearson, are you here for the all-hands meeting? I am. Arthur is expecting me, I said. The conference room was packed. Partners who usually attended virtually had flown in from across the country. Junior staff lined the walls. Arthur stood at the front, flanked by board members. Dominic was nowhere in sight. A hush fell as I entered. Across the room, I could see the relief on Arthur's face. Thank you all for coming, he began. As you know, we're facing unprecedented client concerns following recent staffing decisions. His eyes flicked toward me. I'm pleased to announce that Ruth Pearson has agreed to return to Franklin and Associates as a full equity partner, leading our newly formed client relations division. Murmurs ran through the room. Arthur raised his hand for silence. Additionally, the board has unanimously voted to remove Dominic Hayes as managing partner, effective immediately. His approach was ultimately deemed inconsistent with our firm's values and commitment to clients. The atmosphere was electric. Shock, relief, and uncertainty mingled in the air. Ruth, would you like to say a few words? Arthur gestured me forward. As I stepped to the front, I saw Thomas give me a subtle thumbs up from the back wall. I scanned the faces before me, some hopeful, some wary, all attentive. Thank you, Arthur. I appreciate the offer to return as partner, I began. However, I must clarify something important. I'm not coming back to Franklin and Associates. Arthur's face froze in confusion. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. I'm pleased to announce that I've accepted a partnership position at Blackwell Consulting, I continued calmly, which has just completed acquisition negotiations with Horizon Capital to purchase a controlling interest in Franklin and Associates. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Arthur looked as if he had been struck. The transition will begin next week, I added once the noise subsided. Blackwell has assured me that they value the institutional knowledge and client relationships built here. There are no plans for mass layoffs or restructuring unless, of course, deemed necessary for efficiency. Arthur stepped forward. Ruth, what have you done? I haven't done anything, Arthur. Blackwell has been seeking to expand their Boston presence for years. Horizon Capital, as majority shareholder in FNA, was happy to consider their offer, especially given recent client instability. It's just business after all, nothing personal. As the implications sank in, I could see the dawning realization in Arthur's eyes. He had failed to protect me when it mattered. He had allowed loyalty to be sacrificed for short-term gain. Now, facing his own obsolescence, he understood the true cost of those decisions. The meeting dissolved into chaos. I walked out, head held high. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Winters. Just heard the news. Dinner tonight to discuss Winters Healthcare's future with Blackwell. I smiled as I stepped into the elevator. I hadn't sought revenge, but justice had found its way regardless. The next morning, the Boston Business Journal broke the story. Consulting shakeup. Blackwell acquires Franklin and Associates after client exodus. The article detailed how the departure of a key senior executive had triggered an unprecedented client revolt, destabilizing the firm and reshaping the Boston consulting landscape. The firm was now robust enough to make the acquisition possible. My name appeared only once in the 15th paragraph of the Boston Business Journal article. Ruth Pearson, former Senior Director of Client Relations, has accepted a partnership at Blackwell and will oversee the integration of Franklin and Associates client portfolios. A clinical sentence for what was actually a seismic shift in power. In just 3 weeks, I had gone from a terminated employee to the person steering the future of the very firm that had discarded me. Integration planning began immediately. I worked from Blackwell's offices, reviewing organizational charts and client portfolios from both companies. Each day brought a steady stream of former Franklin colleagues to my door, some seeking reassurance about their positions, others suddenly remembering how much they had always respected my work or quietly disagreed with Dominic's decisions. Arthur requested a meeting 1 week after the acquisition announcement. He looked like he'd aged a decade in just 20 days. You orchestrated this, he said, sitting across from me. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. No, Arthur, I replied calmly. I simply recognized my own value when you didn't. Dominic was a symptom, not the cause. You allowed the firm's culture to change, I continued, prioritizing growth over relationships. You forgot the principles you founded this company on. And now, you've handed me the reins. Arthur's voice was bitter. Not control, Ruth. Influence. There's a difference. One you use to understand. I slid a document across the desk. Blackwell is offering you a 3-year consulting position. Advisory only. No management responsibilities. It's generous, considering the circumstances. He stared at the paper, then at me. And if I refuse? You walk away with nothing but your ownership payout, I said. Your choice. 6 months after the acquisition, Blackwell Franklin Consulting occupied 2 full floors of a gleaming downtown tower. The integration had been smoother than anyone expected, largely because I had insisted on keeping most of Franklin's staff, recognizing their value even when others hadn't. Dominic had landed at a smaller firm, his reputation tarnished by the spectacular collapse he had helped create. He had triggered it. Arthur had accepted the consulting role, though our interactions remained strictly professional. The wound of betrayal, his failure to protect me after 25 years, would never fully heal. In my corner office, I reviewed the quarterly numbers with a satisfaction I'd never allowed myself to display publicly. Client retention through the transition had exceeded 95%. The 3 clients who had left during the initial exodus had already returned. Our combined revenues were up 23% year over year. My assistant knocked and entered. M. Winters is here for your lunch. Catherine Stroh, elegant as always in a tailored suit, stepped in. Congratulations on the quarterly results. The industry is still talking about the most elegant corporate takeover they've seen in decades. I smiled. It wasn't a takeover. It was a market correction. Call it what you want. Catherine laughed. You proved what I've always known. In professional services, relationships are the real asset. Everything else is just infrastructure. As we headed to lunch, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. I hadn't sought revenge when Franklin and Associates terminated me, and I hadn't needed to. The firm had failed to recognize their true value. It wasn't in their systems, strategies, or even their brand. It was in the human connections that made clients feel understood, valued, and prioritized. By severing me without understanding what I represented, they had orchestrated their own downfall, and in doing so, they had inadvertently propelled me into a position I had earned through 25 years of dedication. Sometimes justice doesn't require action. Sometimes it simply requires patience and the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth.